I lay there, sat up in bed, my body too awash with adrenaline to even dream of sleeping or thinking of doing anything. I just waited, wired and awake. Waited for her to come back and kill me. She never did. The sun rose, and with it came the sound of cars in the street and dogs barking in their yards. I nervously stepped out of bed. My feet were cold against the hard wood, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was my mother and how she would react this morning. Usually she was full of smiles and affection after she'd slept off the booze, but after last night I wasn't so sure. Something seemed to have changed in her. When I made my way downstairs for breakfast, she wasn't there. Normally she was eating her porridge and ready to grab my cereal of choice from the cupboard. This time it was just me. The house felt empty. Lonely. I clambered onto the countertop and opened the cupboard, pulling out a box of Frosted Flakes. I did my best to remember what Mr. Gillett had told me the day before. It doesn't matter what my parents think of me, I thought to myself. I need to forge my own path and listen to my heart. I have to do what I think is right, and not let anybody, my parents or otherwise, get in the way of that. I thought about his words over my bowl of cereal. Even if my dad didn't love me, and even if my mom wished I'd never been born, I could still find my own path in life. As I ate, I monitored the digital clock sitting on our kitchen counter. It was a habit I picked up because my mom was always very strict about ushering me into the car by 7:15 a.m. so she could drop me off on time to get to work. Right now it read 7:45 a.m. She was nowhere in sight. A minute later, I heard the familiar creak of footsteps on the stairs, and my mood picked up. Even after everything that had happened last night, my mom hadn't hurt me, and I still had my trivia competition with Mr. Gillett and Oscar to look forward to. Maybe Mom realized that she loved me too much to hurt me. The creaking stopped as the footsteps reached the landing. My dad bustled around the corner, adjusting his tie. He paused, seeing me at the kitchen table. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for Mom," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice rising. I swallowed. My father always had a way of making me feel smaller than I already was. "Waiting for Mom, Dad." He stared at me with something between irritation and disbelief. "Your mom's not home." "What?" "I said she's not home. Do you need a fucking hearing aid now too?" I looked down, eating another spoonful of Frosted Flakes. Where did she go? I wondered. She was here last night. My eyes drifted to the digital display. The clock now read 7:50 a.m. Class was starting in 10 minutes, and so was my trivia competition. It took at least 10 minutes to drive to school. "Dad?" I asked. "Have you seen my briefcase?" he said impatiently. "No, sorry." "Fuck!" he snapped. "Stupid bitch probably took it." He adjusted his collar and reached for the coffee pot, before realizing it was empty and flung it across the room where it shattered on the wall. "Everything I do," he screamed, "taken for granted." Mr. Gillett's words echoed in my head. To believe in myself. To trust in my instincts. To do what I felt I needed to. I cleared my throat. "Can you drive me to school? I have a trivia competition." "Do I look like your mother?" he said incredulously. I stared at him, feeling tears well up in my eyes. Eventually, I shook my head. "I have a real job," he said, grabbing his jacket from the wall and opening the front door. "I don't have time to play at being a parent." He muttered something about ingrates and then disappeared through the doorway, shutting the door behind him. I sat at the table for a few more minutes, too stunned to do anything. My mom was gone. My dad was gone. It was just me in the house now. My family didn't care about me. Nobody gave a damn. No, that's not true. Oscar cared. Mr. Gillard cared. I snatched my jacket from the coat rack beside the door and exited after my father. I used the keys that we hid under the rock in our garden to lock the house behind me, and I started jogging towards the school. Now, usually when I walk home with Oscar, it'd take us just over an hour. Unfortunately for me, though, Hillcrest School lived up to its namesake. My school sat atop a large hill, overlooking the rest of Plumberry Township. At the top, it was a really spectacular view. To the north, you could see most of the local streets, all the way up to the city hall downtown. To the south, you could see far down the country road, all the way to Lake Tyler and Jefferson Forest beyond. Still, it was uphill, which meant that it would be a longer walk to and from. I was determined, though. Mr. Gillard's words recited themselves in my mind like a mantra, pushing me ever forward. I kept my eyes on the watch on my wrist, figuring if I could get there before 8:30, I'd be in the clear. In both third grade classes, we did a sharing period from 8 to 8:30, where we talked about our day or new things we found interesting. My sneakers pounded against the sidewalk, my backpack bouncing up and down with my binder, pencils, and markers. I made good time getting to the bottom of the hill, and at the distant top, I could see the gates that marked the entrance to Hillcrest Elementary. I started my ascent. It was slow going. As I went, I kept track of my watch on my wrist. 8:20 a.m. I had 10 minutes to reach the top, and I was barely a quarter of the way there. My breath was coming in big heaves, and my legs, tired from jogging for so long, burned with soreness. I felt lightheaded and wobbly, out of breath. I continued to climb, more slowly now. I didn't have a water bottle, and I was beginning to feel incredibly thirsty, but I knew I needed to get to the top before the trivia competition started. Somehow, even after everything that had happened with my mom and dad, I felt like if I could just win that competition, that everything would be all right. My mom would come home, and she'd realize how smart I was and decide that drinking wasn't worth it, and my dad would be so proud of me that he'd start taking an interest in my studies. My eyes drifted back to the watch on my wrist, and my heart fell. 8:45 a.m. How had I been walking up the hill for so long already? I stopped, catching my breath, and I realized none of it mattered anymore. I was way too late for trivia. I was probably going to end up in detention besides that. There wasn't any point in rushing now. My day was already ruined. I took the rest of the hill at a slower walk, and my legs thanked me for it. I hated my mom for leaving last night. I hated my dad for not driving me to school. I hated both of them for making me miss out on trivia and disappoint the one adult who seemed to care about me, Mr. Gillard. Tears tugged at the corners of my eyes as I considered how ashamed of me he probably was. He went through all the trouble of securing me permission to attend his class this morning, and I gave him my word that I'd be there. Then I didn't show up at all. My dad didn't so much as call the school and let them know I'd be late. He probably thought I was just as much of a lost cause as my parents by now. "There he is!" a shrill voice shrieked. "Oh my God, he's here!" I looked up as Mrs. Applefig came stampeding towards me, her lined face filled with concern and her tone thick with relief. "Walter, are you okay?" She wrapped me into a tight hug. "Thank goodness, thank goodness!" I had been so absorbed in my own thoughts that I hadn't even noticed I'd crested the hill and come up in front of the school. Mrs. Applefig smothered me with her hug. All I could see was the blue fabric of her blouse. "Fine, Mrs. Applefig," I lied. "I'm sorry for being late." "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay," she said, pressing her face to mine. I felt something wet on her cheek. "Gloria, is that Walter Thimbley?" a man bellowed, and I recognized it as Principal Patel. She wheeled around, nodding fiercely. "It is, Yuda, it is." Freed from Mrs. Applefig's all-encompassing blouse, I became acutely aware of something very strange. My entire school was staring at me. "Bring him over here," Principal Patel called out. "Everybody triple-check your students and make sure everybody's accounted for." Mrs. Applefig ushered me into the line with the rest of my classmates, and I plunked down on the grass beside Jesse Wilson, a blonde kid who held the record for the most school suspensions in third grade. He leaned over and whispered into my ear. "Whew," he said. "Gotta say, man, for a while there you had us worried." "Had you worried?" I said, feeling too depressed to chit-chat. "Yeah," he said. He thumbed over his shoulder, back towards the school behind us. "We thought you were still inside." Still inside? I turned around and gazed at the school with narrowed eyes. Beyond the bell tower, in the center, I saw a dark cloud billowing into the sky. Smoke. "The south wing caught fire earlier this morning," Jesse explained. "We cleared out all the classrooms, but I guess we're still missing some students. You were one of them." I swallowed. The smoke was pitch black and heavy. It looked like it was growing thicker. Firefighters are on the other side, Jesse continued. They've been fighting the blaze for 20 minutes now, but it keeps getting bigger. They're calling in fire trucks from the next town over. I stared, transfixed at the pillar of shadow rising from the school. Beneath it, faint in the brightness of this morning sun, I spotted the flicker of flames. The school was burning. Just then, a cacophony of sirens sounded in the distance. A handful of seconds later, and 2 fire trucks roared over the crest of the hill through the school gates and swung around the parking lot towards the south side. I gazed after them in awe. I'd never seen fire trucks in action before. "Mr. Thimbley," Principal Patel said firmly. I blinked, returning my attention to the front of me. He crouched down, meeting me at eye level. "I need to know if you were with Mr. Gillard's class this morning." "Mr. Gillard's class?" I said, confused. "No, I was late. I was supposed to be, but—" "Jesus," he muttered, shaking his head and standing up. "He wasn't!" he shouted to somebody I didn't recognize. They were in a suit and a cell phone, and their lips were moving fast. "That's not good," Jesse said beside me. "What's going on?" I asked, fear beginning to take seat in my chest. "We're missing 22 kids still, and 1 teacher." I swallowed. A piece of me already knew the answer to the question I was about to ask. "Who?" "Mr. Gillard," Jesse said darkly. "Nobody knows where he is, or his class." "There were 2 doors down from us," I argued. "How could they not know where he is?" Mrs. Applefig appeared in front of us. Her finger pushed to her lips. "Shh," she hissed. "It's important that we're all quiet. It's a very serious situation, and it's crucial that Principal Patel is able to hear what's going on." Jesse and I closed our mouths, nodding in acknowledgement. As soon as Mrs. Applefig shuffled out of earshot, though, we leaned over and resumed our whispering. "That's the thing. They cleared the entire school. The fire alarm went off as soon as the smoke detector caught whiff, and Patel himself made sure to double-check every classroom to make sure they were all clear. All of them. All of them were empty." I shook my head. "That doesn't make any sense," I said, defiance leaking into my voice. "Oscar was in that class. There's no way Patel would miss Oscar. He was the loudest kid I'd ever met. They had to have been there. We were doing a trivia competition today." Jesse shrugged. "I don't know what to tell you, man. That's what I've heard." My mind raced. Where could they be? Mr. Gillard had promised me there would be a trivia competition today. He hadn't told me to meet the class anywhere special. They had to be here. My eyes scanned the crowd of assembled students. Each class was separated into small ranks, with their teachers standing out front. I went over every single one of them twice, then once again to be certain. No Oscar, no Mr. Gillard. Once again, I felt my emotions getting the better of me. Tears began welling in the corner of my eyes, but I took a deep breath. Maybe they had met up at the school and then gone for a walk? I looked up at the near cloudless sky and the warm sun. It was an uncharacteristically nice day for November. Maybe Mr. Gillard took them outside for the trivia competition, so they could enjoy the weather. A crash sounded behind me, and myself and every other student's heads turned in near unison. I watched, transfixed in horror, as the bell tower, now almost entirely enshrouded in thick black smoke, sagged, and then with a loud groan fell backwards onto the blazing south wing. The resultant collision was deafening. The roof of the school caved in instantly, and in its wake exploded an inferno of fire and smoke. Screams erupted from the students. My jaw dropped. I was watching my school, the one place I truly felt at home, be destroyed in front of my very eyes. It was surreal. Like I was dreaming and I couldn't wake up. It was Mrs. Applefig's crying that brought me back to earth. She had a hand covering her mouth and she kept muttering the words, "Oh no, oh no, oh no." A moment later, a school bus arrived, and all of us, whose parents hadn't picked us up yet, were loaded into it. I remember resisting at first, telling Mrs. Applefig that I needed to wait for Oscar, but she kept crying and telling me I had to get on board. "Please," she said, "please, Walter." I relented, and 15 minutes later, the bus dropped me off at home. I used the key in the garden to get back inside, and when I did, I called out for my mom. She didn't answer. So I went into the kitchen to pick up the phone, calling Walter's house. Maybe he was home sick. The ringer rang once, twice, 3 times, then a voice picked up. "Hello?" I said breathlessly. "Sarah? Matthew? Is Oscar at your house with Walter? Please, we need to—" "No," I said. "This is Walter. Oscar's not here." The line went quiet on the other end. Is he not at home? I asked. No, said his mother's voice, though it was broken and filled with sadness. I heard her stifle a sob. I'm sorry, Walter, I have to go. Okay, Mrs. Cortez. The line went dead, and I hung up the phone. I looked over at the clock. It read 10:54 a.m. My dad wouldn't be home for another 6 hours, and in the meantime, I made my way to the living room and turned on the TV, hoping maybe there was something on the news. I flicked through the channels until I spotted a newscaster in front of my school. Here, in front of Hillcrest Elementary, where a vicious fire has caused the bell tower to collapse upon the south wing, the blaze has finally been out and overhauled by firefighters. An effort to locate survivors, as well as fully assess the extent of the damage, have begun. The man speaking, dressed in a nice business suit, turned his attention to somebody off camera. They exchanged a few words, microphone down, and unable to pick up more than a faint mumble of the sound. A moment later, he looked back at the camera and raised his microphone to his mouth. I've just received word from the fire department that several remains have been located within Hillcrest. These remains are suspect to belong to the missing third grade class, taught by Mr. Heinrich Gillard. An emptiness stole through me. The news lady continued speaking, but her words washed over me with white noise. Several remains have been located within Hillcrest. The words haunted me, replaying over and over again in my head. It wasn't until my father came home that I realized just how long I'd been sitting there. Walter? He said before rushing over to me. He pulled me into a tight hug. Oh God, Walter, I was so worried about you. I was in a meeting I didn't hear until 20 minutes ago, and once I did, I came right over. It's okay, Dad, he said, though my voice was void of emotion. Just an odd sort of feeling. All my life, I craved this sort of affection and attention from my father, and yet, now that I was receiving it, it didn't mean anything to me. I felt empty inside. My dad took me upstairs, ordering me my favorite pizza, and rented the newest Harry Potter movie for me. He sat with me all night. Every so often he would ask if I was okay and apologize for yelling at me earlier. But I hardly registered it. My thoughts were consumed with thoughts of Oscar and Mr. Gillard. They were gone. The next morning, school was predictably canceled. My father stayed home with me and put on another rented movie in my room. This one was Monsters, Inc. I only watched it for 20 minutes or so before I wandered downstairs. I found my dad on the couch in the living room. His back was facing me, watching the newsman I watched yesterday. He was in front of the scorched remains of the south wing of my school. It looked like a windy day because his blonde hair was blowing all over the place. I am again in front of the wreckage of Hillcrest Elementary's south wing, where 22 children and one man are believed to have lost their lives early yesterday morning in what can only be described as the greatest tragedy in Plumdale history. My dad reached for his mug on the coffee table and took a sip. It occurred to me that he must have taken the day off work to stay home with me. Yesterday morning, a fire blazed, quickly spreading through the south wing and eventually reaching the bell tower. An old school built in the early 1900s, Hillcrest Elementary was built primarily of highly flammable lumber, and the bell tower was no exception. At 10:13 a.m., it fell backwards onto the south wing, collapsing the section of the school and dooming the individuals inside. He touched his ear, and his eyes looked sideways as if somebody was speaking to him. I'm just receiving word that the investigation has determined some rather disturbing details. I could caution viewers at home that what I'm about to say is not for the faint of heart. The newsman cleared his throat, and I drew closer behind my father. Investigators have located 2 thick wooden doors in the wreckage. The deadbolts belonging to those doors were discovered on the outward or locked position. According to the blueprints, these doors lead to the basement of the school where the Hillcrest archive was held. Jesus, I heard my father mutter, leaning forward and setting his mug back down on the table. The 22 students and teacher, who we have now positively identified as one Mr. Heinrich Gillard via dental record, appeared to have been locked inside the school's basement at the moment of the blaze. Details pertaining as to why are still unknown. The stunning ferocity of the blaze, according to investigators, is due to old film reels located in the school's archive. These reels contained nitrate, a substance which burns hotter than gasoline. I swallowed. One aspect of the tragedy that school principal Uday Patel is wrestling with is that he never physically cleared any of the school's basement areas. The camera cut out. and I see my principal giving an interview in the school grounds, but in a different location during a different time of day. I checked everywhere, he said, adjusting his glasses and keeping his voice level. Every classroom was personally cleared by myself, as well as a team of 3 other faculty members. We ensured to check all of them. I double-checked them personally, and I suffered severe smoke exposure in the process. Of course, in the interest of protecting my student... What about the basement? The interviewer asked from off-screen, and then recognized the voice as the newsman from earlier. God, he appears a lot more than I thought he would. The screen cut back to the newsman, and a small icon in the corner reads live. Principal Patel's voice cracked as he began his reply. I saw no need to physically check the basements. It seemed a dangerous task, given the relative size of them, and the speed at which the blaze was spreading. As I walked by the basement area in each wing, I called down and asked if anybody was down there and needed assistance. I heard no response, so I continued on. There simply wasn't any time. The screen cut back to the newsman, and a small icon in the corner read live. Strangely enough, despite Principal Patel's calls, nobody answered. Given the amount of remains located within the school's archive, it seems as though such screams would have been loud and plentiful. One theory as to why Patel didn't hear any of the victims was that they had already suffered from toxin inhalation due to the nitrate film off-gassing. It is highly likely they'd already passed out. Sorry? The newsman brought a hand to the earpiece again. Seconds ticked by in silence, and I realized somebody must have been speaking to them on the other end, because his expression slowly became more and more disturbed. Finally, he cleared his throat and brought the mic back to his lips. For those watching at home, particularly family members of the suspected deceased, your viewer discretion is advised. His voice trembled as he read, and readjusted his grip on the microphone. He cleared his throat. I can barely believe I'm about to say this in Sleepy Plumdale, but investigators have just determined that based on observed damage to a child's hyoid bone, their throat is presumed to have been slit. The newsman closed his eyes and took a deep breath. According to the dental records, one Oscar Cortez appears to have died prior to the start of the blaze. I gazed, transfixed in horror at the television screen. My father was too stunned to notice me creeping ever closer, drawn towards the scenes on the display. It has now been posited that perhaps this young man was killed in an attempt to scare the remaining 21 children into silence. Oh my God, my dad muttered. He ran a hand through his mess of hair, and I could tell by his sleeves that he's wearing his house coat. He didn't even bother getting dressed today. I took another step closer, and the floorboard croaked. My dad turned around. Walter? He exclaimed. Jesus, Walter, you shouldn't be watching this. He rushed around the couch, and the newsman's words became muffled against his chest as he lifted me up and carried me back upstairs. You need to take it easy, all right? He said, ferrying me through the hallway. I know you're going through a lot right now, and I know your worthless joke of a mother abandoned us. But the two of us have got to stick together, okay? And that means you got to trust that I know what's best for you. I don't want to see you out of your room again today, all right? He gently lowered me onto my bed and hit play on the Monsters, Inc. movie. You need to take some time for yourself. Don't worry about the news. It's all just conjecture right now anyway. He paid me a remorseful smile and closed my bedroom door behind him. I laid there, staring at my wall and oblivious to the sounds of Sully and Mike from the movie. All I could think about was Mr. Gillard's words, playing on repeat inside of my head. I never felt fulfilled because each day I felt like I was part of a play or an act. I felt like I was fighting tooth and nail against my instincts, and it was only making me more desperate to see them through. Tears slipped from the corner of my eye, thanking the newsman. Thanks to the newsman, I finally knew the answer to my trivia question. Nitrate burns hotter than gasoline. Good evening, kids. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video. I wanted to give a quick second also before we end tonight to let you know about twitch.tv/MrCreepyPasta. It's my Twitch channel. Sometimes I play video games there, but for the most part, I record stories for the channel live, and I hang out and we play this little thing called Stream Raiders. So if you guys would like to go over there and give me a follow or whatever, I'd appreciate it. And we can hang out sometimes and talk and do what it is that we Twitch people do. And of course, I want to give a very, very, very big shout out to all of my followers on Patreon, especially Bloodlace, Peter Bowie, AcidSystem, F, Alan Hyper, Brennan Matthews, Mary Massacre, Janine Hook, Paul Livingston, Seth Joseph Richards, Ashlyn, Deadeye Nick, Azad Hosenbokus, Rick Dance, Bryce Charles, Luminen Walker, Sheri Morgan, Jake Mcnee, Victoria Helton, BDH9294, Melinda S, Phinney, Nathan, Dante Rowe, Jane Rennalls, acebandg, Ryan Kellum, Bobby J. CAVANAUGH, Barbara Biggs, BellaBailey, NinjaGrace, Dad Obsessed Trash, Suzanne Grow, Tommy Walters, Tater Chip, Onbu Op Willie, Sarah Gree, Yuri Catslash, Randy, Brad Gustafson, Sean Tristan Markham, B. Lisa Tyser, Jose Rodriguez, Adagio Rose, Peaceful Buddha, Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Ho Gunkchi, Justin Johnson, King Hades F13, Michael Scarborough, James Lowe, Someone You Love, Nina Smith, Rafael Rodriguez, and Chance Burnett. You guys, as always, are the real MVP, and I can't thank you enough for helping me get to where I am now and, generally keeping me alive. So thank you all so much for supporting on Patreon. Thank you everybody in the description for supporting on Patreon. And thank you everybody out there who's listening and watching somewhere across the many reaches of the internet. Have a good night and sweet dreams.